I think we can all agree that the COVID-19 pandemic was a strange time for everybody. As tragic as it was, though, the pandemic was also marked by some eerie, weird, and downright crazy changes in, well, pretty much everything. So take a hopefully non-socially distant seat and get ready for the very craziest changes that happened through the pandemic. Wardrobe warriors. No matter where you are in the world, your government probably gave out the same COVID advice. If you have to go outside, stay away from people and wear a mask. Some people took this advice a lot more seriously than others, though, which led to a whole load of crazy costumes you'd never have seen before 2020. And take this guy, who wasn't just breathing through a self-filtered snorkel, he'd also donned the accompanying eye mask for a trip to the shops. He really dived right into this one, didn't he? The whole family in China also decided to throw their self-consciousness out the window to avoid the deadly disease. As well as face masks, they donned disposable cagoules and, more weirdly, water containers over their heads, making them look like the bad guys in a really low-budget sci-fi movie. At least they didn't subject any animals to the same fate, though, unlike this woman who wrapped her poor pupper head to toe in plastic bags. Oof, that looks rough. Taking the crown for the craziest COVID dresser of all, though, we have this man, spotted waiting for a train in a Chinese subway. Now, I've seen some pretty weird sights in subways, but this is the kind of weird that's utterly unique to the pandemic. Never mind an outfit. The dude's wearing a whole COVID defense system. The entire look is extraordinary, but those socially distancing tubes net him the top prize for sheer ingenuity. Although I have to give a special shout out to this person in a sealed T-Rex suit getting the groceries. I guess they were shopping at the Dino store. Monkey madness. To stop the spread of the virus, many countries were forced to lock down their borders, which was devastating for the global tourism industry. However, in Lopburi, northeast of Bangkok, Thailand, the lack of tourists affected more than just the economy. The city is known for its huge population of crab-eating macaques, which, despite their name, much prefer the food tourists give them over crabs. And when the tourists suddenly weren't around to feed them anymore, hordes of hungry monkeys took to the streets to fight over what scraps they could find. As 2020 dragged on, the monkeys' behavior only got worse, until people were scared to even go outside. Without their steady supply of tourist-given bananas, the macaques formed gangs, fighting each other over junk food and causing chaos throughout the city. And the warring primates carried on all the way into 2021, terrorizing anyone that got in their way. So, sure, staying at home was boring for us all, but at least most of us only had one deadly threat to contend with if we left the house. Now, stop monkeying around and hit those like and subscribe buttons. I upload fresh, amazing content so frequently, it's the only way you're going to keep up with it all. All done? Right, back to business. Everybody dance. By April 2020, half of the world's population was under some form of government-imposed lockdown. But in those first few weeks, despite being cooped up in their homes, humanity's inherent need to party carried on. In Italy, dozens of living room ravers exchanged clubs for the comfort of their own balconies, as DJs provided the soundtrack from theirs. The videos went viral, and before long, people started memeing them, dubbing over the original tunes with American artists like Katy Perry and Madonna. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the celebrities lapped up the false information as gospel. In a since-deleted post, Katy Perry not only retweeted the faked video, but also mistakenly put the Hungarian flag, not the Italian one. Mamma mia. It wasn't just the Italians that moved to the groove, though. One DJ from Edinburgh in the UK decided to throw a street party and live stream the whole thing on Facebook, though it wasn't exactly Project X.
Everybody together, hip hip! And the next song's quite appropriate, and somebody asked for it. They're staying anonymous, and it's a song called Let's Stick Together. Who was that? It was you. You sent me the playlist, didn't you? Great playlist, by the way. Folks, it goes like this. Let's rock and roll.
Kudos for trying to keep spirits high, but I've definitely not got FOMO this time. Even so, clubbing without the overpriced drinks and potential to drunkenly humiliate myself in front of everyone, it could have been an improvement. Chaos to serenity. While everybody stayed inside partying, finding new hobbies, or just moping around, the world outside came to an eerie standstill. Times Square in New York, the usually vibrant and chaotic epicenter of the city, stood silent and empty in March 2020. One of the city's jewelers described how much easier it had become for thieves to operate in this strange state of desolation. An absence of police, coupled with the lack of any crowd to slow an escape, meant a crook had snatched the shopkeeper's most expensive earrings and got away unchallenged. Over in Saudi Arabia, crowds at the Islamic holy site of the Grand Mosque in Mecca were once so vast they put Times Square to shame. Around 100,000 people cram into Times Square for events like New Year's, but the mosque has a capacity of around 2 to 4 million. This is because Muslims are obliged to make a pilgrimage to Mecca once in their lives, as long as they're able to do so. However, in 2020, the number allowed to visit the sacred Kaaba was slashed from millions to a mere 1,000 to curb the spread of the virus. Those lucky pilgrims that did get to attend were subject to strict rules, social distancing, mask wearing, and a ban on touching the Kaaba itself. What was I doing during all this, I hear you ask? Well, why don't you have a look back through my videos and find out. Dreaming big. If seeing it on the news and thinking about it every waking hour wasn't bad enough, it seems COVID even had an impact on our unconscious lives. Multiple studies have revealed that people were having crazier, more vivid dreams throughout the pandemic than they had before. Not only that, but they generally remembered their dreams better, or, in many cases, their nightmares. It seems the stress of the pandemic, coupled with a lack of interesting stimuli, was doing strange things to our brains, materializing as we slept at night. A lot of people reported dreams directly related to the virus, like one man who recalled becoming an antibody and angrily going around killing any remnants of it he could find. Others reported dreams that were less clearly related. I myself had a particularly vivid nightmare where a horde of you guys all rushed into my bedroom and saw my real face. I woke up in a cold sweat that night. Though we still don't fully understand how dreams work, they often reflect emotions we've felt during the day. Anxieties we may have surrounding COVID are therefore more likely to materialize as negative aspects of our dreams, whether literally or metaphorically. On top of this, more intense, vivid dreams have been theorized to serve as coping mechanisms. Through their sheer intensity, they're easier to remember and may help us come to terms with real issues from the safety of our beds. Pretty mind-bending stuff, right? Did you have any crazy dreams you remember during lockdown? Let me know down in the comments below. Curious cures. It wasn't until the end of 2020 that an approved vaccine was released for COVID-19 and rolled out to a significant number of people much later. But during the long wait for some sort of inoculation, some alternative forms of medicine sprang up. In the Iranian city of Qom, a most peculiar practice was advocated by the self-proclaimed cleric Ayatollah Tabrizian. A denouncer of Western medicine, the controversial religious figure advised the application of violet oil-soaked cotton balls to one's poop portal, if you know what I mean. Tabrizian claims that the oil, commonly found in hair products, is a miracle cure-all, though there's no science to support his claim. Thankfully, the vast majority of Iranians haven't followed Tabrizian's advice, and it's been widely condemned across the nation. Southeast of Iran, in India, a different and maybe even more bizarre cure was being peddled: the rubbing of cow excrement on one's body. Yep, you heard that right. As well as the fairly gross act of lathering themselves in cow dung, one group reportedly engaged in a cow urine drinking party. Blech. Now, I've been to some pretty bad parties in my life, but that'd really take me out of the vibe. But it's not as utterly absurd as it sounds. In India, cows are seen as holy creatures, so their byproducts like milk and pee and poop are believed by some to be purifying agents, though there's no science to support that. Nevertheless, thanks to COVID, poop peddlers started selling cow waste, looking to tap into these beliefs and turn a quick profit by exploiting people's fear of the virus. At around $6.70 for nearly 2 pints of pee, the stuff wasn't much cheaper than beer. And I know which I'd rather bring to a party. Big problem? Big shoes. Despite governments enforcing strict rules for social distancing worldwide, there were always going to be some people that would ignore them. After noticing this lack of respect for the law, one Romanian shoemaker called Grigore Lup came up with a pretty sizable plan to encourage people to stay apart. The plan, you ask? Design and manufacture huge elongated clown versions of regular shoes so people physically can't stand near one another. So Lup expected the same people who probably don't even put on masks to wear these monstrosities? I'm not so sure. Regardless, Lup wasn't about to let any naysayers stop him from pursuing his dream. He designed and marketed the shoes at a whopping $115 a pair and made them in a men's European size 75, which is about a 37 AA in the US. Unbelievably, the tallest man to have ever lived, Robert Wadlow, wore shoes this size, but he was a towering 8'11". Now, it's safe to say if you ever go over to Romania, you won't see everybody walking around in 18.5-inch shoes. However, some people did buy the giant boots, which is a consequence of the pandemic I really didn't expect. Even Santa picked up a pair. I just hope he doesn't have too much trouble getting down the chimney now. Losing is winning. With the pandemic fundamentally reshaping many people's way of life in ways they couldn't control, some people took the opportunity to change their life in ways they could. For one Australian couple, this meant a whole lot of working out. Both were unhappy with their weight, which had gotten out of control after they'd spent the start of lockdown binging on takeout and chugging down booze. At his heaviest, husband Troy weighed nearly 350 pounds. Then, one day, an ad came on the TV for a weight loss plan offering a cash prize for competing in it. Drunkenly, Troy and his wife, Leslia, agreed to give it a go. 1 month later, against their wildest expectations, the couple realized they were actually enjoying the whole process, and the financial incentive took a back seat. Exchanging takeaways for nutritious meals and television for working out was boosting their physical and mental health. After 6 months, the transformation was insane. Troy had lost a whopping 132 pounds, Leslia over 55 pounds, and the weight just kept falling off. By documenting the whole thing on their Instagram, the couple haven't just helped themselves, they've been an inspiration for their followers too. I'm even tempted to put down my bag of chips, but maybe I'll just wait until tomorrow. Peculiar purchases. It's no secret that people's buying habits changed throughout the pandemic. Toilet roll became gold dust, while hand sanitizer could be found in everybody's shopping cart. But people's purchases got a lot weirder than that. Over in the UK, Brits spent the equivalent of $56.1 billion on dispensable lockdown items to alleviate their boredom, ranging from an antique diving suit to a Spider-Man costume. That's taken the mask game to a whole new level. And with the closure of their precious pubs, a surprising, or perhaps unsurprising amount of people bought themselves inflatable equivalents. Because the Brits will do anything to ensure they can drink socially, including, it turns out, buying a life-size plastic skeleton and a dinosaur skull, and combining the two into an undead mutant drinking buddy called Boney Tony. Meanwhile, a survey in the US found that over a third of Americans made impulse purchases to cope with the stress of the virus. One Carrie Harris spent $60 buying her cat a tent, and then went on to admit that she could think of no practical reason for a cat to need one. I don't think something has to be practical to be worth it, though. For example, this giant 12-foot-tall skeleton. I mean, I'd buy one of these any time of the year, just to keep the mailman on his toes. Don't worry, though. No matter how creepy these things might be, at least they're aware of public safety. Forced fashion. After months of being confined to our homes, when the world finally started opening up again, people were both nervous and excited to head back to their favorite haunts. But things weren't quite the same as they were before. A cafe in Germany enforced a rather unique dress code for anybody that wanted to dine there: pool noodle hats. Now, if I'd seen that back in 2019, I'd have thought I'd finally gone mad. In 2020, however, I don't think I'd have batted an eyelid, though I think I'd still have been surprised by this guy who's rocking a look I'm going to call social distance chic. Over in Hangzhou, China, a school employed a similar method to keep its kids' distance from one another. Here, though, the humorous headgear held a more historic significance. 1,000 years ago, during China's Song dynasty, officials at court were required to wear Zhangjiao Putao hats. With long, stiff flaps on either side, they were designed by the emperor to stop his officials getting close enough to one another to conspire against him. I see now why those kids had to wear them. It wasn't because of the virus, it was to stop them conspiring to extend lunchtimes. Alien advances. The prospect of alien life outside our solar system has fascinated humans for millennia. In 2019, there were 6,200 UFO sightings in the US alone. But in 2020, with COVID rapidly spreading across the nation, this number rose considerably to 7,200. And in New York alone, the sightings doubled. Did aliens decide that with Earth at a standstill, it was the perfect time to come down and get a good look? Or perhaps they were behind the pandemic all along? However much I want to believe, a more likely explanation is that, with the world on lockdown, people simply had more time to stare up at the skies. On top of this, the decreased amount of pollution made flying objects easier to spot. What's more, the Pentagon declassified 3 videos taken by the US Navy showing unidentified aerial phenomena, which drummed up increased interest in extraterrestrials. This one shows something a couple of pilots spotted back in 2015, while aboard a fighter jet docked on the USS Theodore Roosevelt. As well as flying against the wind, the unidentified object was apparently preceded by a whole group of similar objects out of camera shot. Even if you don't believe in aliens, this is pretty weird, right? What do you think it could have been? And did you see any strange airborne sightings yourself while in lockdown? Let me know down in the comments. Rise of the mannequins. We know that sightings of UFOs increased during the pandemic, but they weren't the only strange phenomenon to see a surge in numbers. Across the globe, odd humanoid figures started to crop up everywhere. Mannequins. Okay, they're probably not sentient, but they still creep me out. To prevent people sitting too close to each other, restaurants all over the world started using mannequins to take up seats and enforce social distancing. One in Virginia set up a load of the life-size plastic people posed in various positions. The idea was to promote social distancing in a way that made the whole dining experience feel less empty and more normal. Normal for who, though? And the invasion didn't stop there. As well as appearing in a bar in Turkey, the humanoids made their way to South Korea, where they caused quite a fuss in one soccer stadium. Because the actual fans had to stay at home, the football clubs set up what they claimed were ordinary mannequins, or as I call them, fannikins, to add some atmosphere to the stands. However, some astute viewers pointed out that these weren't standard mannequins. They were actually plastic adult companions. A few of the companions were even holding up signs explicitly advertising a certain type of toy. That's certainly one way to keep people interested in soccer. Road bots. I think we can all relate when I say that while we were on lockdown, takeout consumption went up. And with the increased demand for deliveries, some companies flourished, like Starship Technologies, which started sending pizzas around the world in spaceships. Okay, I lied about the spaceships, but they do use these amazing autonomous robots. Food is packed into the bots by restaurants, and then they go off on their merry way, riding along sidewalks and crossing roads to deliver their tasty cargo. Using a complex combination of sensors, cameras, GPS, and even radar, they can navigate cities with 0 humans necessary, and whistle happily as they do so. The company launched the autonomous delivery service in April 2018, and by August 2019, the bots had pulled off about 100,000 deliveries. Jump forward to January 2021, though, and this number increased tenfold to a mighty million, with the bots operating from Wisconsin to Milton Keynes. What's more, none of them had to wait to get vaccinated. I mean, antivirus software has been out for decades. Glamorous glow-up. Breakups are hard. So when Maryland resident Angelina Toppi went through a particularly bad one and just weeks later was plunged into lockdown, you couldn't blame her for being down in the dumps. Rather than wallow around though, Angelina decided she'd get back at her ex in the best way possible, by getting fit. She weighed in at 320 pounds at the start of lockdown 2020, but in just 8 months, she'd dropped an incredible 140 pounds and almost halved her initial body weight. The 24-year-old swapped garlic bread and candy for vegetables and chicken, and combined with a healthy dose of exercise, the pounds flew off. And not a day too soon, because after her transformation, Angelina caught the dreaded virus. Thankfully, she only suffered symptoms for a few days and made a complete recovery. However, if she hadn't lost the weight, she believes the toll on her health could have been a lot worse. So yeah, breakups are hard, but Angelina Toppi is harder. The incredible bulk. We've seen a few people who used their time in lockdown to lose weight. But what about someone who did the opposite? Meet Dmitry Azovsky, a Russian bodybuilder who, back in 2019, looked like this. 2 years and 1 pandemic later, however, and he'd made quite the transformation. No, this wasn't a result of letting himself go, but rather a purposeful weight gain that Azovsky went at lengths to document on his Instagram. But why would anyone want to go from fit to seriously overweight? Well, it turns out Azovsky had set himself a challenge. Gaining fat isn't too difficult, right? Losing it, however, is a different story. And once Azovsky ballooned up to 351 pounds in February 2021, his goal changed. He didn't want to gain anymore, he wanted to lose. Through hard work, determination, and a surprising amount of humor, Azovsky spent the next 8 months working out. And by October, he'd lost an incredible 129 pounds. Now he looks better than ever. This is what fitness fanatics call a bulk and cut. While putting on the pounds, Azovsky was still weight training, or bulking. Then, when he started losing weight, or cutting, He retained most of the muscle he'd built during the bulk phase, while losing most of the fat. What a flex. Black market masks. When governments around the world started introducing mandatory rules for wearing face masks, what had once been a pretty niche item soared into mainstream popularity faster than the rise of fidget spinners. As people rushed to get their masks, and personal protective equipment shortages hit some cities, one man from Brooklyn saw a golden opportunity. In a renegade move, 43-year-old Baruch Feldheim bought a grand total of 130,000 masks, 192,000 respirators, and over 500,000 medical gloves, which he stored in an auto repair shop. Then he went around selling them to hospitals and corporations at insanely inflated prices. One doctor was forced to buy 1,000 masks for an astonishing $12,000. In other words, that's a 700% markup. In a uniquely COVID-y twist, cheap, disposable face masks had been transformed into black market gold. Like all bad crooks, though, Feldheim got sloppy. He'd been conducting the dodgy deals from his own home, and it wasn't long before the FBI caught on to the people leaving his house with boxes of medical supplies. At the end of March 2020, FBI agents approached Feldheim outside his home. Feldheim, ever the gentleman, coughed aggressively in their direction and then told them he had coronavirus. Now, before the pandemic, this would have been rude, but during, it was biological warfare. Unperturbed by Feldheim's act of terror, the agents grilled him about the dealings they'd seen at his house. The crook denied all accusations but was later charged with hoarding supplies, lying to the police, and even assault. For all his thousands of masks, this idiot still couldn't mask the truth. Emissions enigma. One of the few objectively good consequences of the coronavirus was the effect it had on the environment. Due to the closure of businesses and lack of cars on the road, global CO2 emissions dropped by 6.4% in 2020. That's 2.5 billion tons, or double Japan's yearly emissions. This dramatic reduction is the biggest since World War II ended, when the skies finally cleared after years of warfare polluting the atmosphere. Though nothing can top World War for sheer drama points, COVID definitely gave it a good shot. Between January 2020 and February 2020, when China went into lockdown, the amount of nitrogen dioxide produced in the country fell by half. While the top-down perspective is pretty dramatic, the view from the ground is arguably even more so. Over in New Delhi, the most polluted capital city in the world, thick smog covered the India Gate War Memorial back in 2019. Just 1 year later, the air actually looks breathable. Despite the promising plummet in greenhouse gas emissions, sadly, post-lockdown life is already seeing those positive changes reversed. With cars back on the road and businesses making up for lost time by increasing production, emissions are rising once more. But all is not lost. If action is taken quickly, we can still save our planet from the looming threat of climate change. In fact, our response to COVID proves that it's possible. Not the weird wardrobe choices, obviously, but you get my drift. Well, that about brings us to the end of this video. Do you know any other crazy changes that happened through the pandemic? Let me know down in the comments below, and thanks for watching.